Frieza vs. Megatron is a matchup that I've seen floated many times before as a potential death battle. I've been mixed on it as an idea for reasons that will quickly become apparent as this video goes on, but I was down to see it once it was revealed for Season 10, especially once more details about it came to light. Devil Artemis on the animation, DJ on the edit, Brendan Yates on the soundtrack. Yeah, this had all the makings of a standout episode, even among Season 10's already illustrious pantheon. And it was sure to get the community talking, because Dragon Ball and Transformers debates seem to shake a lot of hornets' nests online. All I'll say on that is you'd better keep it civil in the comments of this video, or I'm nuking your planet from space. Anyway, on to discussing the stuff that matters. The analysis previews and the sneak peek of the fight made a good first impression for the episode, and I think the final version stuck the landing pretty solidly. It's not an episode I feel super strongly about, but it's one of those cases where I can give an episode its due props even when I'm not its target audience. Despite that though, I've made some interesting observations about it after rewatching it quite a lot, and I'm eager to see what you all think once I've laid them out. Starting things off is Frieza's analysis. It's generally well written and well edited, with jokes that mostly leave me going, that's funny. The trivia about his design being inspired by real estate speculators is super interesting to me, so it was cool to learn about that. Not so much about his powers and feats, though. That's no fault of the analysis itself. Dragon Ball is just one of those franchises I'm a little tired of seeing on the show because of how samey the characters feel in a versus sense. With few exceptions, they boil down to flying bricks with key attacks and super forms, and I can only see that so many times before it borders on, if you've seen one, you've seen them all territory. And do I really need to talk about how the feats contribute to that? The Spirit Bomb Key and destroying Planet Vegeta are at least some new stuff that's relevant for Frieza, but they don't really play into the debate all that much. And that's because the Universe Shockwaves make their long-dreaded return. Every other feat Frieza gets is basically window dressing as far as the verdict is concerned, which I will continue to find lame every time the Shockwave feat rears its head to overshadow everything else a Dragon Ball top tier has. Golden Frieza doesn't do much to diversify him from his cohorts, but the note about him attaining it after his first ever training session was cool to hear. It's pretty much the exact opposite of Black Frieza, which, I'm sorry, this is the lamest Dragon Ball form I've ever heard of. Golden Frieza has some novelty at least, but his black form has done next to nothing in the series yet, so it's just a cool epic power boost that ends up feeling redundant. I could be wrong there. I don't watch or read Dragon Ball if that wasn't incredibly obvious by this point. But as it is in the analysis, it does next to nothing to impress me. Like, wow, it's stronger than Gas, some dude I've never heard of who was wished into being the strongest? Well, that sure sounds more powerful than destroying a universe 13 times larger than ours. Alright, that's enough snark out of me. The point is, Frieza's analysis is pretty great on an objective level, even if I get very little personal enjoyment out of it. Thankfully, Megatron's analysis is here to pick up the slack, and boy does it. The coverage of his abilities and feats was pretty fun, aided by this being the first Transformers character on the show in 5 seasons. I could have done with fewer instances of the toy robot running gag, but that's offset by the really entertaining segment about Megatron's gun form. Interesting tidbit, by the way, Megatron's gun form is based on the same kind of model that Lupin III uses. This fun fact is brought to you by Ribbit Theater, who is definitely not standing behind me and forcing me to include this because of me slandering Lupin on GGM Lightspeed. Yeah, nothing like that. Help me. What really makes Megatron's analysis stand out for me is the discussion of his origins and story throughout the G1 canon. I never knew about how the IDW comics fleshed him out, and I'm aware some people might have preferred a different canon for Meg Griffin, but I really enjoyed hearing about this one. The reveal that he became an Autobot toward the end of his story was especially surprising. I don't blame Chad for peeking his mic with Boomstick's reaction to that. I felt exactly the same way. But returning to his feats for a second, I can't say they did a great job at making me think this was a close fight. From discussions I saw during the waiting period and even from the G1 blog, I thought this match was a lot closer, but Megatron's only win condition in the episode was his antimatter, which surprised me. That's not a detriment though, there's nothing wrong with episodes that are clear-cut. I suppose it was just disappointing to enjoy learning about Megatron only to realize by the end, oh yeah, he's getting his shit rocked, huh? You know what wasn't disappointing though? DJ coming through with another banger job on the editing. It's not one of his craziest edits, but it looking as good as it does after he had to jump in and work on Cole vs. Alex's editing right after doing Bill vs. Discord is a testament to the man's insane work ethic. The manga and comic panels all look good on screen, with my favorite probably being this motion graphic with Megatron's manifesto overlaid on it. Also, the text and visuals for the calcs really stuck out for me in this episode. They're consistently very well done. So yeah, very solid analyses in this episode, with Megatron surprisingly being a highlight of the season in my opinion. Again, that could be down to Transformers being AWOL from the show for quite some time, but either way, these were quite fun to watch in the lead up to the fight, which I was very excited to get to. Like I said toward the start of the video, the sneak peek of this episode's animation made a great first impression on me, and the full thing definitely delivered on that. First, let's get the obvious out of the way. This fight is a feast for the eyes. This was Devil Artemis's first death battle done with Blender, and while I'm a complete layman when it comes to the technical processes of animation, the change in engine has clearly not slowed him down at all. Of particular note are the effects, the majority of which Devil Artemis did himself. They all look incredible and make the action stand out against the muted color palettes of Space and Cybertron. Another seriously impressive element of this fight is the voice acting, which shouldn't come as a surprise. I think most people expected Little Kuribo to reprise his role as Frieza in this fight. After all, Death Battle has a pretty consistent track record of teaming up with Team 4-star actors for Dragon Ball fights. But even if his performance was expected, he still did a commendable job. He conveys the Dread Emperor's unbothered intimidation so excellently, it's really just wonderful on all counts. And yet he's somehow only my second favorite in this episode, because Tom Schalk, the man, the myth, the Death Battle legend, is taking up the mantle of the Decepticon leader. This might actually be one of my favorite vocal performances this season. Schalk's Megatron sounds exactly like how I'd imagine the Big Bad, emulating the attitude of his 80s cartoon self while breathing new life into him with a dynamic take on the character. When Megatron has the upper hand, you feel his confidence. When he's angry, his voice drips with fury. And when he feels like doing some evil laughter, it's completely on target, sounding equal parts malicious and gleeful. There's still more to say about this performance, but I think I'll table that discussion for when it's more relevant. I don't want to front load this segment too badly after all. But you'll have to forgive me for doing that anyway, because this is the part where GA heaps praise on the soundtrack. And yeah, Final Former slaps. Brandon Yates is definitely defeating the Decepticons with this one. Ben mentioned on the most recent Fireside chat that part of the idea for this song was a villainous sister track to Wings of Iron, and weirdly enough, I got that vibe from it even before he made that connection explicit. Also, the lyrics reference the fan-commissioned Friezatron track Brandon made, and I really enjoy it when those tracks manage to make little cameos in official episodes like this. Not only do the heavy metal instruments tap into my love for strong drum beats and raging guitar lines, but the lyrics tie into the matchup's connections in ways that also suit what's happening in the fight. Like, when Megatron watches Golden Frieza's giant death ball descend upon Cybertron, the lyrics talk about choosing to win over saving what you hold dear. And indeed, Megatron's response to the attack is to try and reflect it back at Frieza like he did at the start of their battle, a maneuver that ultimately spells demise for his beloved planet. It's great. I love this kind of cohesion in Death Battle fights. More of this, please. Now, normally this is where I get to breaking down the fight in my usual style, and don't worry, I fully intend on doing just that. But I want to establish something first. Perhaps fittingly for this episode, there's more to this fight than meets the eye. There are places in this animation where you can tell things had to be cut or shortened, and some of what was left on the cutting room floor can be seen in this episode's storyboards. I say some because I'm sure a lot of death battles get trimmed down from their initial drafts as they go through production. This probably isn't some crazy exception to the rule there. It's just very apparent with this fight in particular, and I want to try comparing and contrasting what's in the finished version with what was planned in the storyboards. This is so I can speculate about how I think the fight could have been changed for the better, if only from my uninformed perspective as a fan of the show. I'll start doing that comparing and spitballing after the main breakdown. With that said, let's get into this one. We start things off with a visual of Frieza's ships approaching Cybertron in the depths of space, with the framing of the shot having the ship completely blot out Cybertron, making for some cool cinematography. Frieza and Megatron's following discussion is great for setting up their dynamic and the stakes of the fight. The action kicks off with a bang as Frieza creates a giant fireball that he directs toward Megatron, only for the Decepticon to use his fusion cannon to knock it back like a massive game of tennis. Frieza sitting in place while his own attack consumes him is raw as hell, and he emerges from the blast in its final form sans his spaceships. It's a really cool way to open the fighting, but it does drag on for a bit. Nothing crazy on its own, but this will start to become something of a trend, so keep that somewhere in your brain. Frieza and Megatron go tit for tat after this, exchanging ranged attacks before Frieza gets himself stuck in Megs' panic bubble. I was really looking forward to how this would play into the fight, since they put a great deal of emphasis on it in Megatron's analysis. And in the fight, Megatron punches Frieza so hard he bounces off one side of the bubble and crashes through the other, careening down to Cybertron's surface. It's a good moment for Megatron to display his tactics and cunning, but as is, the panic bubble feels pretty underutilized here. I thought it would maybe play into the final act, forcing Frieza and Megatron into a desperate close-quarters struggle where only one of them leaves alive. What we got is cool in concept, but I would have liked for the animation to do more with it. Frieza unleashes a slew of death beams after recovering, and Megatron uses his Energon Mace to block them, which looks really sick in motion. Again, Devil Artemis really killed it with the effects in this fight. I also like how inventive Megatron shooting his mace like a projectile with his fusion cannon is. Frieza dodges this and some more energy shots before getting hit, and Megatron lets out an evil cackle before unloading on the spot where Frieza fell, making for a great display of Megatron's malice. However, they said in his analysis that the fusion cannon needs to recharge between shots, so him being able to use it rapid fire like this doesn't seem right. We get some close quarters action after this that's a little hard for me to follow with how hard some of the camera cuts are, but the sound design of Megatron's mace and Frieza parrying it with his fist is very solid. Frieza then puts Megatron in a ball and makes it explode, cratering the surface of Cybertron in the process. I really like how the blast makes the outer shell of Cybertron's atmosphere bend and fold away. It's one of the many ways this fight effectively conveys the scale of the action. However, much like the Death Ball scene at the start, I think this goes on for a while longer than it needed to. Sure, the way it syncs with the Why Won't You Die bridge in Final Formers is cool, but this is time that could have gone to extending the Panic Bubble scene, or other scenes later in the fight that really needed that extra space. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Megatron catches Frieza off guard after the giant explosion by hiding in his tank form, firing a giant laser at his foe that Frieza has to block like he did Goku's Kaioken Kamehameha. It's a nice reference, and so is his subsequent Golden Frieza transformation, which is shot just like how it looks in the Super anime. It's another scene that drags on a little too long for my liking, but I'm sure Dragon Ball fans popped off here, and that's what really matters. It's too bad Megatron couldn't have transformed into Green Megatron here. That form would have wiped Frieza off the face of existence with ease. But then it'd only be fair to have Magma Goku come in to avenge him, and at that point it'd be a different fight entirely, so... I don't know. This inside joke spiraled way too far, and I'm in too deep to back out now. Golden Frieza getting to throw his big fuck-off death ball is really cool visually, especially this shot of Megatron looking up at it from Cybertron's surface. Even if this is yet another scene that feels rather protracted, this fight gets the planetary scale of its combatants across much better than other death battles managed to. It would have been kind of weird if it didn't really, since this is Frieza we're talking about. Destroying planets is kind of his thing. But it won't happen if Megatron has anything to say about it, and he does! In a super cool maneuver, Megatron turns his tank gun around and fires into the ground, using the kickback from the shot to launch himself into space. He then transforms mid-flight and hits the Death Ball with a concentrated fusion cannon shot, trying to repel it like I mentioned earlier. This is one of the coolest moments in the fight, and it's immediately followed by something equally awesome. Frieza using his telekinesis to pull Cybertron into the Death Ball, sandwiching Megatron between them. What a stunning, inventive use of these powers, and in a way that really suits Frieza no less. Top marks, no notes. What follows is yet another scene that keeps this fight's hype train going strong. Frieza floats down to gloat over the gaping hole in Cybertron, humiliating Megatron at his lowest point by easily matching his infuriated eye lasers. But Megatron turns the tables by mocking Frieza's hollow victory, antimatter pouring from his eyes as Tom Schalk delivers a stunning monologue with venom and hatred dripping from his every word. I was stunned into silence when I heard this for the first time. It's so well written and expertly delivered. It's just a shame that the rest of this finale fails to live up to Megatron's speech. Frieza assumes his black form out of rage and delivers his own solid retort, but this potentially cool final clash amounts to Frieza getting swarmed by antimatter and screaming. This is such an obvious fake out. Of course Frieza wouldn't die when his strongest form literally hasn't gotten to do anything yet. The pretty antimatter visuals distracted me from this at first, but as a scene that's supposed to make me think Megatron won, it doesn't really hold up to scrutiny. So of course it comes as no surprise when Megatron gets sliced in half by a death saucer after the smoke clears. Frieza shouting his iconic "die by my hand" line is good, though I'm not sold on how it was delivered. Frieza's lost half his body and is supposed to be fully pissed off at this point, and I really don't think this line read matches that. I also don't care for Megatron continuing the reference by saying, "You fool!" This matches neither his current emotional state nor his pre-established verbosity. Megatron's last 3 sentences of the fight all involve him calling Frieza a fool, so this doesn't stand out as a final line at all. The final hit is cool enough, Frieza's death saucers being strong enough to cut through not only Megatron, but the whole of Cybertron is a great capstone for this episode's use of scale. And while Megatron's actual death being mostly off-screen is a bit of a letdown, Frieza delivering his final line while bathed in the light of Cybertron's destruction is also great. And that covers everything for Frieza vs. Megatron's battle as it appears in the episode. Overall, it's a fun ride with great visuals, solid voice acting, and epic music, but I don't think it's a stretch to say that this has some of the rockiest pacing of any Season 10 fight. Despite its nearly 5-minute runtime, it doesn't feel as fully realized as what came before it, which is as good a segue as any to start talking about the cut content in the storyboards. Right away, there's a significant difference in the opening. When Frieza goes to talk to Megatron, he's accompanied by Apple, a soldier of middling rank in Frieza's army. He doesn't do much, just reminding Frieza of Cybertron's name and dying when the Death Ball incinerates Frieza's ships, but his absence affects the fight more than you'd think. Remember, during Megatron's antimatter speech, he asks, "Where is your army?" This has always stuck out to me as strange, because despite Frieza having the 2 other ships aside from his mothership, Megatron had no reason to assume Frieza had an army with him. He never saw any actual soldiers, so him commenting on Frieza's lack of troops doesn't really make a lot of sense. But in the cut material, he saw Apple address Frieza as his superior like a soldier would, so it was reasonable for him to assume Frieza had an army with that added context. There's a bit of cut dialogue for Megatron here, but it's fairly insignificant and doesn't amount to anything, so that's a revision I think was justified. When we get to the panic bubble scene, we do indeed see that there was a lot more planned to happen here, with Megatron smashing and dragging Frieza around the edge of the barrier before pitching him through it and down to Cybertron. This is a much more thorough use of the bubble, and I really wish we'd gotten this in full for the finished animation. The next bit of cut content can be seen after Frieza uses his death beams, where Megatron gets in close for some fast-paced attacks with his Energon Mace rather than shooting it as a projectile. In fact, after Frieza spins Megatron around by the mace and throws him away, this is where the fight was meant to go to Frieza getting surprised by tank form Megatron. The exploding bubble bit was fully off script from the look of things. This presents an interesting dilemma. I gave the finished fight a lot of praise for how it demonstrated the scale of the fighter's attacks, but a lot of those parts also contribute to the fight feeling overly drawn out. So, what do you prioritize? Flashy demonstrations of large-scale destruction, or smoother pacing for the progression of events? I'll let you think on that while I keep going. It seems that Megatron's use of his tank form was also cut down, since he does more with it before blasting Frieza away and forcing him to go golden. Frieza's golden transformation isn't part of the storyboards, but I can imagine that the script may have pointed toward the transformation in the source material here to save time on John Mitchell's creation of the storyboards. Something that's also missing are the extended shots of Frieza throwing the giant death ball down at Cybertron, where the storyboards instead cut to Megatron launching himself right after Frieza throws the ball. Despite my praise for the shot of the death ball descending through Cybertron's atmosphere, I think I prefer the storyboard's more streamlined presentation of events, especially considering what comes after it. When Frieza pulls Cybertron toward the death ball in the boards, we actually see it hit Megatron and him still firing his laser from the planet's surface, not giving up until the death ball actually lands. It's a far cry from the finished fight, where we don't see the planet hit Megatron and his laser just kinda disappears before the big kaboom. After this, there's an extended melee clash with Golden Frieza basically smacking Megatron around like a huge toy, and it ends with the I-Beam clash actually blasting through Megatron's eyes, which is really cool and a lot more than we got in the final version. The rest is more or less unchanged, with just an extra line from Megatron and some actual struggling from Frieza against the antimatter with some different framing for their final attacks. So yeah, there's a lot that the final version of this battle does differently than what was planned according to the storyboards. Both versions have positives and negatives, so it's not productive to just say the storyboards were better and leave it at that. Instead, I think some combination of the two versions would make for the most well-paced fight that still makes use of this battle's planetary scale. For starters, cut out the drawn-out scenes that aren't vital like the imprisonment ball explosion, and speed up the ones that are vital like the initial death ball and the golden Frieza transformation. Then, use that saved runtime to add to scenes like the panic bubble scuffle and Megatron's counter blast. Basically, trim a lot of the downtime in the fight to give Frieza and Megatron more time to do cool stuff, while still allowing for some moments where the fight can showcase its scale and cool explosion effects. I could go more in depth, but this video is already getting to be rather lengthy. So instead of waffling on even more, I've made a rewritten version of the fight showing how I would balance the final and storyboard versions of the battle while making some of my own changes. A link to that will be in the description, so feel free to check that out. Anyway, that's about all I have to say in regards to the fight, so let's wrap things up with the verdict. It's about what I expected after watching the analyses, with the gap in stats being even more blatant now that they're being directly compared. I liked their elaboration on how the antimatter wasn't a guaranteed win on its own. Speed versus hacks is a determining factor I tend to enjoy seeing in death battle conclusions. And that's this episode wrapped up. With two very good analyses and a fight that, while also good, could have greatly benefited from better pacing, Frieza vs. Megatron is a low 9 out of 10 for me. It's far from perfect, but it's a very fun watch that definitely brings the hype. And it's only just teetering around the middle of my ranking for this season thus far. Season 10 really is flexing all over its predecessors, huh? Well, it has a good chance of keeping its hot streak alive because next time is Gojo vs. Makima. One of my Cypher Wheel predictions was right, let's fucking go, baby! I'm really excited to see this episode, not because I'm a big fan of either character, but just because I find the debate really fascinating. It's so vastly different from any other fight Death Battle has done, so I can't wait to see what they do with it. Until that episode comes though, go watch my Frieza vs. Megatron reaction highlights. That video's linked in the description, and so are other Death Battle content creators you should watch. Thanks for sticking with me to the end of these longer videos, it's always very much appreciated. See you again soon for the next video!